Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. You're all invited.
Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we combine alcohol and horror for your entertainment. Today we are making a drinking game for Evil Dead Rise that was released on April 20th of 2023. The movie is written and directed by Lee Cronin, who also made The Hole in the Ground.
Evil Dead Rise takes place in a Californian apartment complex where mother Ellie is raising her three kids, Danny, Bridget, and Cassie. The family is visited by Ellie's sister Beth after she comes back from traveling. Once again, passages from the Book of the Dead are read out loud, one of the main 5 characters become possessed, and all hell breaks loose. Interestingly, Ellie is not only the one tying the family together, but she's also the one who ends up getting possessed.
Just a bit of a forewarning, we will have mild spoilers within the rules themselves, but nothing that will really take you out of the movie. Furthermore, we aren't going to have any totals for the drinking game as this movie was released so recently. Anyways, let's get on to the rules.
So starting off this drinking game, as always, is death. If you see a death, you take a sip. And while we don't have the exact number of deaths for this movie, we can tell you that there's at least a handful.
Yeah, there's some that are pretty gruesome. You can see that a lot in the trailers, so that really shouldn't be too much of a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's worth mentioning that we do, again, like all of our other Evil Dead drinking games, we do count when a human dies, and then, for example, if they come back and die as a deadite, we count that as well.
Yeah, it all kind of depends, but not when they change it to deadites. That's kind of a gray line. So
Yeah.
For instance, if somebody in the movie turns into a deadite, that's not a death, unless they clearly die within the movie before that.
Yeah, exactly.
However, let's move on to the next rule, which is screams, cries, and yells. I will add that for this expansion in the, I guess, Deadite universe, we'll call it the Evil Dead universe, we don't have an Ash Williams, so there isn't as much scream, crying, and yelling. Because I'm pretty sure whenever Ash gets attacked, he screams or yells, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, there's not one character giving us all the drinks, but I think there's going to be a lot of screaming in this movie. I think it'll give you a good amount of sips. Like, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of screaming. Once, like, in the first 20 minutes, maybe not much. There isn't that much screaming or crying at all. But then once the shit starts hitting the fan, there's a lot.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of see it, especially for the Evil Dead franchises as well.
Yeah, well, and with how gruesome some of this shit is, you can expect it.
Yeah.
But obviously, like we said, we don't have the totals, so we can't be totally accurate with that.
And
this is just all speculation.
Yeah, some scenes also try to tug on your heartstrings, so maybe there's a few emotional cryings in there as well. Emotional cryings, is that a good word? Sure.
It works. But enough on that rule, let's move on to the next rule. That is whenever you spot a callback or an Easter egg that is a reference to the franchise in the past, I guess, and to any other movies, really. And honestly, it really depends how many you spot, because it can be quite a lot. Like, even myself, I spotted quite a few.
If you're really paying attention.
If you're paying attention and trying to find them, which, if you've seen the entire franchise and know this is a rule, you're going to be looking out for them a little bit more. But it's also easy to miss.
Yes. And in saying that, this might not be too kind to newcomers for the Evil Dead franchise, especially if they haven't seen the movies.
Yeah.
However, it's also worth mentioning that this movie specifically, you can kind of go into it blind, and you'll still have a good time.
Oh, yeah.
So you might want to disinclude that rule if this is your first time watching any Evil Dead film, which is fine.
Yeah, well, even if it is your first time, you might know some references. Like, for example, some of the very obvious ones, like a chainsaw. Ash's chainsaw is almost iconic, even if you haven't seen the movie, or his boomstick. And there's references to those. So, like, there's some you might still get, but for the most part, this is a rule for people that have seen the franchise. And, yeah, it's the first time we've kind of done this in a drinking game, but we felt it happens often enough that it could be a fun rule for people that have seen the franchise. So we decided to keep it as a rule.
Yeah, certainly. Well, anyways, let's move on to rule number 4, which is whenever a deadite is seen or somebody gets possessed. And again, this is another franchise rule that we've had almost throughout the entire
franchise.
Franchise.
Yeah, so this movie doesn't ever outright call them deadites. So we did feel like we should clarify, like, whenever somebody gets possessed, just in case you don't know the term deadite or, something like that. All right, let's move on to rule number 5. It's whenever the peephole is looked through. And this won't give you too many drinks, but near the middle of the movie, maybe a little bit in the beginning, but it won't give you too many drinks. But it's a unique rule, and we felt like it's a good one to include.
Yeah. Furthermore, it's kind of from, I guess, our other rule, which was whenever there's a POV shot in the other Evil Dead movies.
Yeah, it's kind of inspired by that.
Yeah,
twist on it.
It's inspired by that. Furthermore, that does happen in this movie, just not as much. And we thought we'd just kind of put a more unique spin on it.
Exactly.
The only other rule returning from the franchise is whenever the Necronomicon is seen, mentioned, or read from. Again, this happens, I'd say, about as much as all the other movies. I think, if anything, less.
I would say a little bit less, to be
honest. A little
honest.
bit less, but even then, I still think it is an instrumental part in the plot.
Oh yeah, well for sure it is, as it is with pretty much literally every Evil Dead.
Yeah.
But in this one, they again changed the look of it, and it's got like some teeth on the side clasping it together. What is your opinion on the way it looked for this installment, I guess?
I like it because it's a reference to the third Evil Dead movie, Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
And I love that they kind of expanded the universe in that movie.
Yeah, and I do agree. I liked it, and I like that it was kind of forced shut, and there's only one way to open it. If you've seen the movie or know Evil Dead, you know how it needs to be opened. Mm-hmm. We won't say it because maybe it could be a spoiler, but yeah, I also like the look of it, and I mean, I like that they changed it up, I guess, at least too.
Yeah, it was a shakeup that didn't really... I guess the word I'm looking for is steal from any other Evil Dead. They didn't have like the continuity of the book being here, now it's here, especially from like the remake or the original. They had something that's still within the universe and actually had it make sense.
Right, yeah. Well, moving right along to rule number 7, it's whenever mother, mom, or motherhood is mentioned. And I think this happens quite a bit in the movie.
It certainly does.
Including, we should say, whenever pregnancy is referenced. That's motherhood.
Part of motherhood.
It falls in line. I wanted to specify that just in case. And I guess it's a good time to point out that we did make 2 drinks for Evil Dead Rise, and both of us were inspired and took on the mom angle. So both of our drinks are some way, shape, or form inspired by, mom or mother, the mother figure, I guess I should say. Anyways, if you want to watch those videos, just go click up there, somewhere above Alex's head.
How the fuck did that get there?
Click on those, and it'll take you straight to our shorts to watch those.
So let's move on to the next rule, which is whenever Staphne is seen or mentioned. Staphne isn't in the movie too much. It's just a fun little name that the little girl gives her, I guess, weapon.
Yeah.
It's fun that the little girl has a weapon in this movie, like the 8-year-old.
Yeah.
But, yeah, just fun little rule to have.
Yeah.
Wasn't too much, but we felt that it was noticeable. I mean...
Oh, yeah, it sticks out.
It's the Shakespeare theme of, if you see it in Act 1, expect it in Act 3.
Pretty much. And I guess we should specify what Staphne even is, because when you first see it, you don't know the name of it, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, the little girl, Cassie, cuts the head off of a doll and puts it on like a, I think, wooden broomstick or something.
Yeah, she cuts it off with a pair of scissors and hides the scissors.
Yeah, and basically she puts the head on the stick, tapes it up, I don't know for sure how she sticks it on there. And basically it's a staff with the baby's head on it. Yeah. And she calls it Staphne as like a pun for Stephanie, of course.
I thought it was going to be for Daphne.
Nah, well, maybe, but I figured Stephanie, Staphne.
Oh, yeah. Maybe both, who knows?
Could be either way. I didn't even think of Daphne.
Yeah, I think this kid's just really clever.
Yeah, more clever than us. Anyways, let's move right along to rule number 9. This is whenever records are played or seen. And I think it doesn't happen all that much, but it might be double digits.
Yeah, especially since whenever Danny's playing his records, he has 2 spin tables, so sometimes it's doubled.
Right, yeah, when he's DJing or whatever, he has 2 going because he's trying to do that. The thing they used to do in DJing where you transition from one record into the other while, like, mixing it, and then once you're smoothed over, then you put on another record and go back and forth. He's trying to do that, essentially. So, There's a scene, at least, that comes to mind where it'll give you probably 2 or 3 in one go. But it doesn't happen too often in the movie, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of scenes that actually have that. Anyways, let's move on to the last rule here, which is whenever something extremely painful happens to somebody. This isn't just like minor cuts. These are things that kind of horrify you in a way.
Yeah, that almost make you cringe.
That's the word I'm looking for.
And there's a few examples that are even in the trailer, so this is not spoilers. However, if you haven't seen the trailer and are trying to avoid any sort of information, I guess skip ahead 20 seconds. But, there's the cheese grater.
Something has to happen with it. You saw the trailer and you knew something had to happen.
You don't see what happens, but you know it's involved, and you know it's painful, obviously.
I was expecting a little bit more from it.
I did too.
Just a little bit more, like against somebody's face, but like...
Another example is scalping. That's in the Red Band trailer.
Oh, yeah.
So something along those lines. We won't go into any other of the specific ones that we think of. This could be a little bit up to interpretation. We do understand that. So even if we do count the rules and how many times it happens, it probably would be different to you. So it's just up to your own interpretation, I guess. That's worth saying.
Certainly.
So that, of course, wraps up our drinking game for Evil Dead Rise. We do want to remind you that we don't have any totals for this movie, just to avoid spoilers as much as possible. But that won't stop us from speculating how much we think we would have drank for this movie.
I speculate that it's going to be in and around 3.5 sips. Not quite as much as some of the other Evil Dead drinking games. A little bit less, but still, I think about the average, a little bit less maybe. Yeah. I'd still think it's going to be a fairly strong showing in comparison to some other movies.
Yeah, maybe 3.5, maybe 4, depending on how some rules are interpreted, how many Easter eggs you find, stuff like that. It'll fluctuate, of course, but I think 3.5 cans is a good estimate. I do agree that it would be less than some of the other Evil Dead movies that we've had, just for some of the rules we included, I guess. And honestly, there wasn't many rules that do happen a ton of times, I don't think, other than the mom rule, like mom or motherhood being mentioned, especially because the kids are calling their mom all the time.
Yeah, that's the big one for sure.
That one for sure is big. I think Scream, Cry, and Yell will be big in the middle to end of the movie. And other than that, there's not going to be a ton. There might be some scenes where there's a lot of clusters. Yeah, that we could say that. But
scream, crying, and yelling, I know that it's probably going to happen a lot more than I let on initially. And the reason that I say that is I thought the remake of Evil Dead wouldn't have a lot, but it ended up having a good chunk. I think it had over 20. So yeah, I think it's also going to be one of the ones that hits the hardest. Right.
I guess it is worth noting, we did have at least one other rule that we were debating on including, and it's a rule that we've used in the past for Evil Dead franchise for another movie. I think it was Evil Dead 2, maybe?
I want to say 2, or it could be 3.
I think it was 2.
Maybe it was 2, I think.
Go watch our Evil Dead 2 and 3 and tell us. Anyways, that rule is whenever there's excessive blood, and there's a lot of it in this movie. I think if you haven't seen the Evil Dead franchise and you don't want to use the callback or Easter egg rule, you can swap excessive blood in with that just to give you the round 10 number rule, I guess. It's, if you want to even include it, to have an 11th rule, go for it. Yeah. It does happen quite frequently.
It happens quite frequently. I think they had, over 6,500 liters of blood or something like that in the movie.
Something crazy.
Yeah. So quite a bit. So, it's got to be somewhere on screen. So definitely look for it.
Yeah. And we didn't include it in our rules. We thought there's some other rules that maybe were better that we didn't want to reuse from other movies as well. But it's certainly a rule that deserves mentioning, an honorable mention.
Yes. And with that being said, we hope you enjoyed our drinking game on Evil Dead Rise. If you ended up playing the drinking game alongside the movie or have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below.
Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our podcast, the Bottom Shelf Horror Podcast, where we'll be making an episode where we're ranking every Evil Dead installment entry in the franchise, including the TV series. We do want to say that. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.